Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson. Thank you for tuning in. This is episode 22. We are a top 1% podcast. If you didn't listen to episode 21, only 1% of podcasts ever make and publish 21 episodes. So we are top 1%. We are top of the game here. That doesn't mean I'm good. That just means I can stick out recording 21 episodes. But we are on episode 22, Boiler Wild. You may be wondering how I came up with that name. WILD is actually an acronym, and it stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. I am a huge believer that we need to work on ourselves personally in order to grow in our career. It's not enough to just learn technical knowledge. Can't just learn about boilers and whatnot. If you go home, sit on the couch, are lazy, don't eat right, drink alcohol, do drugs, all this crazy stuff, you're not healthy. That will carry over into your career. You cannot keep one or the other. If you exercise, eat healthy, drink a ton of water, take care of your body, don't be surprised when your career starts blooming and you start feeling great. You know, being a service technician and drinking a couple energy drinks every day, probably not the best thing. It's probably not the best thing to eat gas station food all the time. So it's probably not the best thing to eat fast food all the time, but I try to share some insights about stuff I've learned about personal development. I am by no means perfect. I wouldn't say I have achieved anything amazing. I am still in the works. You are seeing me building this every single day. If you don't know, I am the CEO and founder of Boilearn. That's BOILEARN. We're a boiler training company with a mission to drive continuous learning and improvement in the boiler industry, trying to help contractors, in-house operations teams, anybody with a boiler to learn about steam systems, hydronic systems, to build competency management programs, and to grow people instead of relying on your competitors to hire them. So that's what we do. I started it about 2 years ago, and we are making it. But end of the week, this episode comes out on a Saturday, so I hope you had a great week. Hopefully you are doing something on the weekend that is productive. The weekend is always a great time to relax. You don't always have to work every single hour. Taking a weekend off and doing things you like, hobbies, spending time with your family, doing all that stuff, that is all good stuff as long as you are doing something you enjoy and, can get away from work stuff. It's always good to put your mind on something else, to walk away from problems, to think about something else. I have found that, if you're frustrated at work, frustrated with your manager, coworker, something, that you walk away for a weekend and things seem to heal up and you can kind of forgive and forget. And a lot of the time it's just frustration that doesn't have any real purpose, and you may just need a nice weekend to cool off and refresh and get back at it on Monday morning. Boilers can be stressful, especially this time in August. If you're in the boiler room, it's hot. I don't know what it is about engineers and cutting costs, but for some reason they design those big fancy buildings, and when it comes to the boiler room, They say, oh, let's put a little 5-inch fan on the side of the wall, and yep, that's going to cool it. And you have all these boilers in there with radiation of heat and all the pipes and pumps and water, and then they're like, no, we don't need to insulate the DA. That's too much money. We'll skip insulation of the DA. It's like, all right, well, the DA is 227 degrees. You basically have a sun in the middle of your boiler room, and that is radiating heat everywhere. And then you wonder why your boiler room is 120 degrees and everybody hates it. And nobody wants to go do rounds or blow down, because every time you walk out of a air conditioned office or you walk into the boiler room, it is 100% humidity and 120 degrees. Like, make the boiler room comfortable and people will spend more time in it. But, building owners and engineers, they got to cut costs. I mean, I understand it to a point, but it's 2025. There is zero reason why boiler rooms need to be as hot as they are when you are building a brand new building. Another gripe I have, maybe for another day, but lighting as well. For some reason, they cut back on lights, and I don't know what it is. They think people in the boiler room are magical. We have x-ray vision or something, but you go into boiler rooms and, man, I remember one brand new hospital. I'm like, where are the lights? Like, it was so, like, they just had cheap LED 4-foot by 1 bulb hung lights, and it had to be the minimum lighting for fire code or whatever. Like, I was like, this is really all we get? And, you get one light in between the boilers and no lights behind the boilers. And yeah, it just makes for a ton of dark space, which, if you've ever tried to solve problems or do something or investigate something in the boiler room and it's dark, it can be frustrating. Now you have to have a flashlight and work lights, and it's already hard enough, and not being able to see what you're doing adds on to that as well. So anyways, today's topic, we are talking about how and why natural gas got its odor. So how it got its odor, when that happened, and why it has odor. If you don't know, natural gas comes from the ground, and I don't know if byproduct is the right word, but it's a byproduct of drilling for oil. When we originally were drilling for oil, there wasn't a ton of use for natural gas. We knew it was flammable, but, the natural gas pipelines across the United States really didn't start till the 60s and 70s, and that's when it got like super popular for distribution. So before then, we would produce more natural gas than really consumption, so a lot of the time it was burned off or wasted and whatnot. But through the 1800s, when we're drilling for oil, early 1900s, natural gas was just kind of this thing that people had to figure out what to do with. Unfortunately, as code goes, you may have heard that code is written in blood. And in this case, natural gas is written in blood on why it has an odorant. So natural gas smells like, people say, it's supposed to smell like rotten eggs. I don't know if it smells like that, but that's sulfur smell kind of. But I don't even think natural gas has sulfur in it. They used to, but they've evolved the odorant to something else. But it adds an odor to the natural gas, as natural gas coming out of the earth that's pure does not have a odor to it, so you can't detect it. So not being able to detect a flammable gas can probably be a bad thing. And in 1937, we found that out was a very bad thing. So you got to think 1937 We are nearing the end of the Great Depression in the United States, but we are very, very much very primitive as far as safety and industry. 1937, that's not even 100 years ago, but safety regulations were barely a thing, and we were still learning. I mean, the ASME, Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code, they only came out with it in 1915, so it's only been out for 10, 20 years. 1937, there's a school in East Texas in the town of New London. So New London, there was an oil boom. They had discovered oil in the area, so a lot of people, such as like drillers, came into the town, and with that came their families, and the town built itself up around the oil business, as most of Texas has since then. So New London, this is March 18th. It is a school, and the school was recently built, and in order to save money, you've heard that. So in 1937, they were cheap, trying to save money, even though oil the oil boom was happening and money seemed to flow from everywhere, and they didn't have real cost considerations. So that's something to keep in mind. The people that always say, oh, they used to build things better back then, and they always spent money. Oh, they don't want to spend money on maintenance now, fancy accounting, corporate. There were still cost cuts and, cheap engineering back then, especially with the safety codes. And just because, we didn't know any better. So that's a lot of survival-ish history and survivorship bias of recency of, people 100 years ago, they did things right. Well, here's a perfect example in 1937 of them wanting to cut costs. So they didn't want to build a central boiler plant in the building. So in order to cut costs, they had natural gas radiators, which would heat water and would heat the rooms with steam. But you had, I think it was around 90 natural gas radiators. So you would have like a little burner on a radiator all throughout the school, which is crazy to think about. And that's how they would heat the school. Obviously, no air conditioning. So that was estimated to save them around $4,100 a month in today's dollars, which back then it was $250 a month. So for $250 a month of fuel savings, they didn't want to build a boiler plant. So no boilers in this school, but we have natural gas radiators in all the classrooms and rooms and everything. And below the school was a crawl space. The crawl space was unventilated and was about, a foot or so high. So, but it was pretty long and large below the school, and this allowed a unventilated space for natural gas piping to flow through it. And what the school had done, since we hadn't really evolved with natural gas and gas was naturally cheap next to them, was they tapped into a byproduct line of natural gas that they were using to condense a water vapor, I believe. I forget what it's called, but it's a condenser unit, and they were condensing natural gas. But the gas line was coming right out of the ground, and the school was using that gas. There was no control or refinement of the gas. And at some point, the students started complaining about headaches and feeling nauseous, and the school investigated that morning and they had a meeting about it, but the maintenance person could not find any issue, and they went in the crawl space and they lit a match and to help see themselves try to find the leak better, but they couldn't find anything. And once again, the natural gas was not odorized at this time. So if you went in the crawl space and there was natural gas, you would not really know that there was natural gas. And even if the natural gas did carry an odor with petroleum, a petroleum odor, since it was unrefined natural gas just right out of the ground, there were wells all around the town and there was a petroleum smell in the air. So a oil smell wouldn't be unusual at the time to smell around the school. It'd be very, very different from our normal civilized society that we have here in 2025. So they couldn't find anything at that time, but later that day around 3 p.m., the wood shop teacher plugged in a sander and that caused a spark, and that spark ignited natural gas that they believe was in the crawl space. And that crawl space, the whole foundation of the school lifted off the foundation, and that concrete pad went all the way up through the roof and destroyed that section of the school. There were 294 to 319 deaths. The total death count was unconfirmed, but think about 294 deaths at a school today. Like, the community would have pitchforks and torches out if that happened. And basically after the explosion, if you weren't initially killed in the explosion, all the debris coming back down, such as, the concrete floor, the levels, it was, I believe, a 2-story school, but all that concrete coming back down could have killed you as well. So the whole town rushed over and they spent the next 17 hours going through the rubble, finding kids that were trapped, dead, whatnot, and they sifted through it all. And there weren't any. It was all a community matter, which is very different than what would happen today. If something like that happened today, it would be red taped, and you would have the FBI and local fire departments from the neighboring 20 towns, and nobody would touch anything, and it would be very, very, it'd all be government response. And at this time, you just didn't have any of that. So it's all community people that work in the community. They just got to work carrying dead bodies out, finding alive people, but they sifted through all the rubble. They were cutting up concrete, rebar to do anything to make sure nobody was trapped alive. And in that time, they didn't really have any serious ways to investigate how it happened. There was a note that they thought it could have been dynamite. So they were using dynamite to create a high school track, and they were storing dynamite in the auditorium of the school, which is another thing to think of crazy. Like, dynamite stored in a school, just probably a box that, the workers threw in the auditorium. Like, that's crazy to think about on how far society has changed. You think you have helicopter parents today, when, something minor happens and they call the school principal. Can you imagine if parents found out that there were sticks of dynamite being stored at their elementary school? They would, once again, they would have pitchforks and they would burn down the whole school and have the school board's heads But anyways, way different times back then. It wasn't the dynamite. They concluded it was the natural gas, and they never found the source of the leak. Everything was basically destroyed. But from the after the looking at the rubble after the fact, they concluded that the only way to have the entire school lift off its foundation is to have a giant pocket of natural gas under the school develop and ignite. And I will talk a little about that. So a lot of people think if you smell a natural gas leak, nowadays you'll get that odorant. But a lot of people think, hey, I smell natural gas, and it's like the movies where you smell natural gas and you think the whole area is just going to explode. If you smell natural gas and you just get a whiff here or there and it's not a super strong odor, it probably hasn't hit the lower explosive limit yet. So for combustion of a fuel, of natural gas, of flammable gas, you have to have oxygen, which is in the air. So you have a lower explosive limit and an upper explosive limit. So the lower explosive limit is the minimum concentration of gas in the air in which a flame will not propagate. So basically, you don't have enough gas in the gas-air ratio in order to make flame in the air. And a lot of times that's what will happen when people smell natural gas. It doesn't, you're not at risk of an explosion. Obviously, it's a serious matter, and, you got to do what you got to do, call it in, whatnot. But just because you smell natural gas doesn't mean your whole house or building or area is about to just go up in a fireball just from one little sniff of it. It has to build up to enough gas to air ratio. On the flip side of that, if you build up too much gas, which is the upper explosive limit, the UEL, it's the maximum concentration of gas in the air above which a flame will not propagate. So if you were to have a chamber that was filled with 100% natural gas, you could not light it because you didn't have any oxygen. You didn't have any air to add to that natural gas. So contrary to the movies, if your entire house fills with gas, you can actually get too much gas in a house and then it won't light. But if you get between the UEL and the LEL, you are screwed, and that's the flammable range of the gas, and that's when you find out that there's an explosion. But natural gas safety is serious. If you do smell a leak, that is why they added deodorant, and you should report it, find it. Obviously we're boiler professionals, so we're probably the ones that are, trained to be there to find the leak. It's way different than just a normal untrained individual smelling natural gas. But I will tell you, I found from my service technician days that there is nobody better smelling natural gas than elementary school teachers. I was working in a small elementary school, and I was working on a hydronic condensing boiler, and 2 million BTU boiler, no big deal. Had an old school Kiwani next to it as well, but I was taking a fitting off of a pressure tap for the inlet gas pressure after I was setting combustion. And, so you release a little bit of gas, but the gas pressure at this school was only 11 inches of water column. So, you just take out the 1/4-inch plug, and then, you put your little fitting on. And in that period of 1 to 2 seconds of taking that out, about 30 to 45 seconds later, 2 teachers come wheeling around the corner of this boiler room door, and they're like, "We smell natural gas. Do we have to evacuate the school?" And me being the boiler guy, I'm so used to the odor of natural gas. Like if you don't have like a very fresh sense of smell and then walk into a room that and smell that odor, like if you're used to the odor, it's kind of hard to detect natural gas, and you just kind of get used to it. So I was used to it. I never like, I obviously know what I'm doing and I expect the odor to be there, but not even 45 seconds later, like I said, two teachers come wheeling around into the boiler room. "I smell gas. Do we have to evacuate the school?" I'm like, no, everything's fine. Like I was, taking off the gas. Just a small amount came out, and they're like, "Well, we smell natural gas all the way down the hallway and all this stuff." I'm like, "What? There's no way. I only had the fitting off for like 1 to 2 seconds, a little quarter-inch fitting. Like I can barely smell it in the boiler room." I'm like, "No, I took a fitting off. Like everything's safe. Everything's good here." And they're like, "Well, we're calling maintenance. We don't trust you. Like we smell natural gas. There's kids in this school." Like everything's fine. Like I took out my combustion analyzer and showed them like, "Look, there is 21% oxygen in the air." And then I had a gas meter as well. So look, the gas meter does not detect any natural gas. I'm like, I have 2 atmospheric monitors here that detect gas, and I also detect a safe atmosphere. Everything is fine. Wow, we got to call the head of maintenance because, we gotta make sure they get over here and check this out, and we can't have natural gas leak at the school and all this stuff. I'm like, all right, whatever. So, head of maintenance comes over. He's like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "We smell natural gas." He's like, "Oh, like what's?" He's like, "Yeah, we have boiler maintenance. Yeah, you might get some natural gas." He had the gas line open for real quick, and they're like, "Oh, well, we just wanted to make sure everything was safe." He's like, "Yep, everything's good. Yep, I trust this guy. I know." I'm like, "We're good to go." So there are plenty of other instances I had from people telling me they smell natural gas in schools when I was just doing something quick like that, but that was the most memorable one because I wasn't like bleeding a new gas line or something. It was just taking a little quarter-inch fitting off, and all of a sudden, 2 teachers come wheeling around the door. And these teachers, all they know is if you smell natural gas, the entire school is about to blow up. So, they obviously should be asking somebody about it. Don't ignore it, but if there's a professional in a uniform in the room that says everything's good, you're probably good. Although these days, I don't know, there's some sketchy contractors out there that could probably get you killed as well. So call maintenance if that makes you feel better. But I knew the maintenance people, they're the ones that call me. So they knew I was at the school when they got the call. So they weren't too worried about it. Now it would have been a worry if nobody was at the school and they just started smelling natural gas. But opened up the boiler room door to the outside, aired it out, and got the lingering smell, I guess, of natural gas out of the boiler room that I couldn't even smell at that point because I was immune to the smell. But anyways, yeah, elementary school teachers smell natural gas like crazy. But remember LEL, UEL, that is important. So at some point, going back to the school, at some point, the gas had crossed the LEL threshold, the lower explosive limit, and it got into the flammable range, but didn't cross into the upper explosive limit. So when the maintenance person went into the crawl space the morning that they were trying to investigate the gas leak, and people were complaining about like headaches and stuff, and he lit a match to try to see better, we had not gotten above the LEL at that time, or the natural gas leak hadn't started yet. We don't know, but that's just kind of just some looking back of what could happen. Once again, this is 1937. The regulations and investigations and procedures is way different than what we have in 2025. But at some point, they know that natural gas built up into the flammable range. A spark from electricity from a sander being plugged in at a wood shop ignited the natural gas, blew the school off the foundation, and killed 294 up to maybe 319 people. Tragic, very tragic. So after a very short investigation, they found no wrongdoing, but they did identify that they needed to add an odorant to the natural gas. So Texas mandated that they added an odorant to the natural gas, and that eventually spread through the United States, and then it became a federal regulation in the 60s with a pipeline act that the federal government passed that natural gas had to have an odorant and all the fun stuff of that. They've changed the odorant and what it smells like over the years. It wasn't always what it was, but they've changed it a little bit, but that it gets pumped into the stream of natural gas at the supply so that we as humans can smell natural gas. And when you smell it, there's a problem. You shouldn't have a leak. So that's how the odorant of natural gas came around. Obviously tragic that 294 people had to die, mostly kids, in 1937. But that's why we need to appreciate the people that came before us and respect the people who came before us and the codes that were written in blood and all these safety procedures and whatnot, code books that seem like a hassle. It's only a hassle to those people who forget why they were written. There's always a reason why a code is written. Nobody just adds. Codes are not like laws where politicians just randomly add stuff at their own flavor of the day. There's reasons why codes are added, and there are reasons why states adopt codes and standards, and we as boiler professionals need to understand those codes. So probably the most well-known code in the boiler industry would be the ASME Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code. And then you would also have the CSD1 standard from ASME. You'll have the national board, and then you'll have all the local state codes. So each state will have its own thing. Some states just adopt codes from ASME and whatnot. Sometimes they add on their own thing. Like New York City will add on its own thing. Chicago will add on its own thing. It's all up to states, jurisdictions, cities, and whatnot. But they have to adopt all the codes into law. NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 85 for boilers, NFPA 86 for furnaces, like big process burners furnaces. Those are very popular. There's NFPA has probably thousands of codes and standards. Not all of them are applicable to flames and boilers. NFPA has grown into a very, very large organization, but NFPA 85 and 86, NFPA 54, the National Fuel Gas Code. So those are the popular codes. But if you are a boiler professional and you are not aware of the codes in your jurisdiction, in your area, your state has a website where you can find out what applies, what doesn't apply, or somebody in your company can tell you. If you're younger, you probably have somebody that's more experienced in your company that can tell you what codes and standards apply in your area. Go look them up. NFPA, you can read for free online. CSC1 standard, if that applies in your state, it's like $150 online. You might be able to find a free version online if you search the boiler and pressure vessel code. Section 1 is high pressure boilers, power boilers, how they call it. Section 4 is low pressure boilers and hot water heating and supply boilers, and your employer may have copies of that. Browse through it, read it. I would highly recommend reading it. And then I think it's section 7 and 8 are the recommended care and operation of power boilers and heating boilers. I believe it's 7 and 8, but your employer, boss, somebody more knowledgeable than you, if you don't know, will know about that, and they'll maybe have a copy that they can share with you. The ASME boiler and pressure vessel code to buy is pretty expensive, so hopefully your employer has a copy, but that is good reading material, and that is all the material. When somebody says, oh, that's code, that is what they should be able to point to. And if they can't point to the section in the boiler and pressure vessel code or the national board on like what they're referring to, they're just making it up. But those codes are important. That's why we have boiler inspectors. That's why we have fire marshals. That's why we have life safety. That's why we have, in a lot of boiler rooms, we'll have carbon monoxide detectors, which is another odorless gas. That is all for protecting humans. And we should do our best to not kill each other accidentally because we are being dumb and forget what our ancestors have taught us. So education is important. Hopefully you learned something. I appreciate you listening. Episode 22. If you enjoyed this episode or any other episodes, I would appreciate a 5-star review on the podcast, either on Apple or Spotify, whatever you listen on. 5-star review. That would be amazing. If you hated it, send it to your competitor or somebody else you hate so that I can waste their time as well. And still leave me a 5-star review because it costs you nothing, costs you 30 seconds of your time, but it means the world to me. It means the world that you would listen. Thank you, and stay wild.